Good evening and welcome to Mindful Live 463. I am your host, Nathan Springer. Thank you for joining me. It is currently the 10th of February, second month of the year 2025, and we're along the way in this second month here. What's good in February? Black History Month. One of the squatters severed a pre-action protocol letter, one of which, or squatter you mean? One of the squatters served a pre-action protocol letter? Or one of the squatters you meant? That squatting issue is interesting. It's interesting, that whole squatting bacchanal. But someone said there isn't any positive news, any positive news in the news, nothing positive in the news. And to some extent, Loverboy says need oil companies to open back up in Trinidad and Tobago. Are you sure? We still have oil companies in Trinidad and Tobago, just by the way. You mean an oil refinery? We need an oil refinery back in Trinidad and Tobago. That's a different thing than just an oil company. But yeah, somebody said nothing positive in the news. And to some extent, do we look at news for positivity? Is that where you find your positivity? You turn on to the news for the news to uplift you and give you a dose of positivity to make it through the day? Because if that's the case, I think we may be looking at the wrong source. We may be looking to the wrong location for this level of positivity. That's not really what the news is about. And like, if we're being honest, and what do we want from the news? Do we want the news to inform us of the things that are most dangerous, most scary, most worrying in the country? Or do we want the news to be a diatribe of positive affirmations that we can listen to, and it tickles our fancies and makes our hearts fly? Like, if you're lacking positivity, maybe you need to find a good spouse. Yeah, a good husband, a good wife. And when you wake up in the morning, let them tell you how beautiful and wonderful you are. But unfortunately, the news isn't really there for that. News is to sell TV ads, radio ads, and newspapers. Yes, and no, but yes. Primarily yes, because it's a business. So they're out there to make a business. But if you're talking about the usefulness of news, as we regularly like to hear people talk about the bastions of democracy, the fourth estate, those who stand between totalitarianism and the people, the voice of the people is represented through journalism and the news and all that good stuff. Yes, we know a massive part of all of that is just mama guy talk. Yes, I agree, but part of that is true. And if part of that is to be true, then news cannot just be positivity and good vibes. It just won't function too well like that. If you understand what I mean. That just won't be the good functioning for news. Good night, Karim Del Pesh over on YouTube. Welcome. So let's see what's in the news for us today. First up, did you all hear? It has been years since I watched news. I quicker reading newspapers. Me too. I don't really watch a heaping lot of news, and I like online for that, because I don't have to listen all of the news you want to tell me. I could go and listen the news I think more important, skip through some that I don't, fast forward through so I don't have to listen to it at whatever snail pace they decide, watch no ads and all of that. So the internet has changed a lot of that, at least for me. But nonetheless, it's still about making money for the news folk, isn't it? At the end of the day. Did you all hear on the whole oil and gas talk? You all hear that we're looking to expand our borders, our maritime territory? But negativity sells more. according to what you're selling. If you're selling alerts, like an alert, an emergency. Hey, host, if you're selling alerts and emergencies, what would sell more as an alert? Not negative stuff, dangerous things. Tell the people good night.
Good night.
Nathan, what direction are they planning the expansion? I am not 100% certain. I would guess it would be more into the Atlantic, but they're talking about our continental shelf, so I suppose that's going out into the Atlantic. That would be that kind of direction. And I think it has to be the Atlantic because any other direction would have quite a bit of bacchanal in it. Any other direction would have quite a bit of bacchanal, so I could only see the Atlantic direction by and large. What you want to tell the people? Barbados will buy a battleship, Barbados won't do a thing. What do you want to tell the people before you go? Tell them you don't have to. Oh yes. Listen to the host, right? Calm yourself. You don't have to while up. Barbados will buy a battleship and Barbados ain't buying a thing. Like Barbados isn't the worry, I think. I don't think we are really targeting Bajan waters. More of a worry would be probably if we start to bounce up to Guyana waters or Venezuelan waters, because like if Barbados has no oil, there's only so much they would complain. But if Guyana and Venezuela has oil, and it's clear our expansion isn't just about getting more ocean to fish, really and truly. So it would really be more competition among the nations who have interest in those kind of resources in the first place. Let's jump into the story and see what is being said here about this. If we're going to get some more land, if as Trinis we need to collectively pull out the tree line and run out for them. TNT seeks to expand territory for resource exploitation. Trinidad and Tobago is seeking to expand its maritime territory beyond the standard 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone. To exploit additional natural resources, Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley has announced. Rowley made this statement a short while ago during his keynote address on the opening day of the Energy Chamber of Trinidad and Tobago's 2025 Energy Conference at the Hyatt Regency Hotel, Port of Spain. Our marine area, in particularly the southeast coast, has been a prolific producer of oil and gas. We are optimistic that the current exploration programs, and especially the deep water exploration, will have a similar success, Rowley said. Trinidad and Tobago, as a coastal state signatory of the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, has the opportunity to submit a claim to enlarge its jurisdiction in the maritime sector. We are currently seeking to delineate the outer limits of the country's continental shelf beyond 200 nautical miles from which the breadth of the territorial sea is measured, he said. Our territorial water is very small when you see it on the GPS. Friday Forever says, as a government, they cannot be what has already been broken for the past 10 years. Utter nonsense. I'm not sure I follow exactly what you mean there. Rowley said, if successful, Trinidad and Tobago will be in a position to exploit the natural resources to be found on that extended portion of its continental shelf. And, it seems a lot like Trinidad and Tobago. We're here kind of hoping we hit oil and gas again, eh? A major part of what we're doing is hoping, please let there be some more resources out in the waters out there. We desperately need it. But along that conversation, especially in relation to the energy chamber in and of itself, there was an article that I saw written by an energy expert out here in Trinidad and Tobago that sought to bring and share some light on the whole idea of the change in electricity prices, because we know the energy chamber is one particularly lobbying for us to remove the subsidy. Abu says the oil is there, it's just deep water wells. Well, I have some slightly conspiratorial beliefs on that. I don't believe the oil will run out. Don't kill me. I'm speaking on a global perspective here. I don't believe the oil will then run out. I think agriculture will help us, Kenzel Adams says. Help us how? I don't think it's even possible for Trinidad and Tobago to make as much in agricultural export as we did, or as is potentially viable with oil and gas. Guyana has a massive chunk of the rainforest, the Amazon rainforest. They have a lot of land. They have a lot of rivers, prime for agriculture. They were seen as backward until they found that oil and gas. Abu says it's strange to me that the oil companies don't want to extract the proven reserves. That's not totally strange, because there are political and economic considerations all through it. All along there are considerations. It's not all to their best profit to just pull it all out at the emergent point. And something else that, for example, the shale oil and gas in the United States revealed. It revealed that, as has always been, necessity is the mother of invention. As we increase in our technological capabilities, and we increase in the demand for these resources, we'll figure out other ways to more efficiently get it in more difficult to get places. There are places currently that we know oil exists that we kinda can't get it right now. But Trinidad have oil long time and still backward, Corrine says. What do you mean by backward? In what way? Because in the same way that Guyana was considered backward, Trinidad isn't. And in what manner would you be saying that there? What way are we still backward? In what way? And compared to who? But the energy chamber has regularly for a while been against the fuel subsidy on electricity. They want the government to remove that, saying that that would really help the country and the economy. The energy subsidy is taking a lot of resources from the country and all of that good stuff. Well, there was a recent article by an energy expert that sought to clarify some of that. Subsidy? What subsidy? The myth of an electricity subsidy in TNT and the forces behind it. He says it's a myth. What's going on here? The Energy Chamber of Trinidad and Tobago, which over the past few years has led an aggressive campaign to remove the electricity subsidy for consumers in TNT, is governed by a 15-member board of directors, of which 7 are from the foreign companies in the upstream segment of the industry, extractors of natural gas like BP and Shell, and the downstream segment, converters of gas into easily exportable commodities like Atlantic LNG, and the owners of processing plants in Point Lisas. Corinne says socially, economically, still undeveloped, and why we have to compare Trinidad collected trillions. You have to compare because you can't compare where you are to perfection because no one has attained perfection. To compare how useful or how effective something is, you have to compare it to another available example that worked. So where do you consider to be so much superiorly socially and economically developed than Trinidad and Tobago would be the real question to ask there in terms of saying we were backward there. So for example, when I said the statement that Guyana was seen as backward, I am not even saying Guyana was backward just by the way. I am saying it was seen as backward by many, especially in their comparative neighbors in CARICOM, because Guyana didn't have the same access to amenities, to technology, to increased employment in further advanced jobs and portfolios as Trinidad and Tobago, for example. So what would be the example you're using to say Trinidad was backward? Abu says, would the smelter plant have been a positive right now? Was it a good idea? I can't 100% answer that because I don't know, but it sure could seem so. And I don't believe that people were really worried about the environment with it, to be honest with you. I don't think 99% of the people that protested it were really concerned about the environment and that's why they were doing it. No, I don't think so. I think it was a convenient political football at the time and that's what it was used for, to be honest. This in spite of that group representing only 5% of the chamber's entire membership. So what the guy is saying is basically the board of the chamber is is nearly half represented by a group of people that are only 5% in number of the members of this whole chamber. This is an oddity. It is in fact enshrined in the Chamber's bylaws where members are classified by revenue, which gives them disproportionate voting rights to elect board members based on that distinction. In light of the absence from this part of Trinidad and Tobago's society of the equal opportunity aspect of the democracy, which we have so long cherished and taken for granted, it is not surprising that the consequence of their lobbying efforts for the removal of affordable natural gas from TNT citizens and businesses is aimed at increasing their profits. What he's alleging, good night Angel, Rose Petal Angel Nick, what he's alleging is that the Energy Chamber wants TNTEC to increase the electricity prices to benefit their bottom line profits. It's not about helping the country in general, it's about benefiting the profits of a few companies. Friday says our black gold is one of the greatest resources and that foolish government leased it away. You're talking about the pitch lake, I suppose. The lease, I have no idea. I don't even know what's going on there. Who knows? Who knows? Good night, Jonte. What is a subsidy? The use of the term seems to have evolved to suit different circumstances. As a layman, the traditional description as a selling price below the cost of production or the market price appears to be a sensible one. Cement has raised that 7%. Karen says, well, when they kick out the competition in the cement industry, what do we expect to happen? What is a subsidy? Is it when you sell below the cost price of making the product? Or when government pays something on top of it to make the product cheaper? Various definitions going through there. He's going through here to explain that there is a subsidy on oil and gas in Trinidad and Tobago, but there's not a subsidy on natural gas, which we use for electricity. petroleum subsidy in TNT is codified in law. In response, and listen to this, in response to the massive increase in the price of oil brought about by the Arab oil embargo of 1973, the TNT government introduced measures to stabilize the economy and protect the quality of lives of citizens via the Petroleum Production Levy and Subsidy Act of 1974. This law provided for a levy to be charged against upstream oil producers who otherwise stood to benefit disproportionately from the increased revenue they receive from selling the nation's oil. So, basically, when the Arab countries decided they were going to send the price of oil skyrocketing, the private companies in Trinidad and Tobago, would have benefited enormously from the increase in global prices of oil. While the increase in global prices of oil would have affected the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago by increasing what they have to pay for the end product. And would it make sense as a country that if we're saying the natural resources of a country belong to all the people of this country, that as the natural resource becomes more expensive on the international market, we are punished by having to pay more for it while not getting direct benefit from it? The benefit of increasing prices benefits the private companies that increase profit, while we actually have to pay more for it because of that. What the government sought to do since 1973 was make a change to that. That when that price increased, that extra money would recirculate back to the population and work as what we called the fuel subsidy. That makes sense, doesn't it? That makes perfect sense to me. It shouldn't be, especially in the context of a country like ours, where almost all of our extraction industry companies, especially back then, were foreign companies. Friday Forever says, wouldn't the Ukraine-Russia war have an effect on that price increase on oil and gas? It did. It did, and it did have an increase. But we're not talking about recently, Friday Forever. We're talking about the history here, 1973. Why did the fuel subsidy come about? It came about so that as prices increased, there'd be direct benefit to the citizens based on the resources that our countries own. It is of interest to note that the Petroleum Act of 1969 makes provision for the fixing of prices for fuel products in the domestic market and the subsidy attached. The responsibility for this lies jointly with the Ministers of Energy and Finance, as these two have access to all the information on costs incurred by the producing companies. They are well positioned to understand and set an appropriate level of subsidy if a cost plus profit margin formula were to be used. And you know, what would make a lot of sense here is if everything was a lot clearer. But especially with this PNM government, there's a lot we don't know. So we don't know what the cost of producing the resources are to us. So we can't tell what the profit margins would be. So then we can't tell if it is that these private companies are increasing or decreasing in profits. Gas is not subsidized. This too is codified in law. The Petroleum Production Levy and Subsidy Act specifically excluded gaseous petroleum products from both the subsidy and the levy. In other words, the law excludes natural gas from being subsidized and natural gas producers from paying a levy. Why this was allowed to continue as the failure to introduce a windfall profits tax on gas when prices reached $16 per MBTU, when concessions including tax holidays were made for an expected market price of $1 to $2 is also another story. Here's a little side in this. if you're paying attention to the words here, you know, he's writing as some of them write. But we did not introduce a tax on these companies, the natural gas producers. We did not increase a tax or create a tax on them for windfall when the price of natural gas went up to $16. They just pocketed that profit. But when the price went down to $1 and $2, we gave them tax concessions and tax holidays. You see, I am an individualist. I am okay with capitalism. People do what they do and make their money. But I have a massive problem when governments love to collectivize the risk and collectivize the losses, but privatize and individualize the profits. So when the resource hits its most expensive, these companies are raking in profit hand over fist. No problem. And it's like, okay, well, they're a private company and they're just making more. That's how the market goes. Okay. But when the market drops to $1, all of a sudden it's, well, you have to understand, if we keep taxing them the same amount, the companies are going to run a loss and they are going to. So why the hullabaloo about electricity subsidy? In its lobbying for an increase in electricity prices, the Energy Chamber argues that the natural gas used for electricity generation is subsidized, as it would get a higher price in a foreign market. Their preferred definition of subsidy is one that transfers the benefit of the gas to the outside parties, bolstered by the promise that this would result in higher tax revenues to the state, which could then be used to provide services to the people. So you understand what they're saying here? They're arguing that right now, the gas we're using for electricity generation would gain a much higher profit if they could keep it and sell it on the international market. And if they could sell it on the international market, they would make more money and give us more taxes, which the government could then use to provide us with goods and services. And this was my problem, as I said, even when we were discussing the removal of the fuel subsidy in and of itself, where you're telling me that what is better is that we tax these companies, give the government the money, and the government then turns around and spends the money for my benefit. While what I am telling you, I would prefer, blessings links, what I would prefer is you give me the money in my pocket by giving me cheaper fuel at the pumps, and I will decide how best to use the money. The example I said, if it now takes $400 to fill up a vehicle that it would have taken $150 to fill up before, that's $250 extra out of pocket. You're telling me that when we spend that money, it would go through these companies, there would be some more taxes. Bear in mind, the taxes may not be equal for equal, 250 for 250 in taxes. But let's say even if it's 250, even if it's 250 per in taxes we get, do you think the government is going to give us that benefit better? Or do you think you would have given yourself that benefit better by saving that money at the fuel pump? As the Poten and Partners report of 2015 and the Natural Gas Master Plan has shown, what was that you were saying about Manning wanted to increase the tax on energy companies? We'll get to some of that. has shown, and as I have demonstrated in various articles over the past 20 years, in the highlighting the choice by successive ministers of finance to not uphold the law by not fulfilling their obligations to put in place the prescribed permanent petroleum pricing committee for determining the actual taxes due and prevent the common practice of transfer pricing. It is clear that we have been unable or unwilling to collect our fair share of revenue. What is transfer pricing? So these companies are multinational companies. They don't only exist in Trinidad and Tobago. So they have goods and services that they will sell to each other, their own subsidiaries, their own sister, brother, co-companies all about the world. But because they're selling to themselves, they could decide what price they sell each thing at. So if I don't want to pay the taxes in Trinidad and Tobago, I could sell my goods from my local branch to a branch in a tax haven country, a country that has taxes that I find more conducive to what I want. I sell it to them at a price that I say I make nearly no profit with. So I have no profits to tax in Trinidad and Tobago. And then I allow my foreign company to sell it for the maximum profit wherever they're going to sell it, and make the money in that country and get away with my taxes. And that's what everyone knows in Trinidad and Tobago they have been doing for quite some time now. But everyone knows there is a law, there is legislation to avoid this. The Petroleum Taxes Act second schedule to form a permanent petroleum pricing committee, and no government has done it. Come on now. What we really telling ourselves here? What it is we telling ourselves here? We just want to lose all the taxes money. And here's the double whammy in that, all right? We are supposedly supposed to be making the bulk of our money here from the taxes. These aren't our companies, so they're selling the product and making their profit for themselves. But they are to pay taxes to us, and the taxes is how the country benefits. And instead of giving us the direct subsidy, no, allow these companies to sell it where they have to sell it. And then the government would use the money in goods and services. Well, Abu says, well, the only man to even mention it lost the following election. You know, we're going to talk about how countries and those companies get involved even in Trinidad and Tobago. Once we have enough time, we are going to dive into a very interesting story. I found it very curious that this story popped up at this very time. When we're done with the oil and gas business, we'll jump into something around that. Very interesting stuff around that influence and how people lose elections and what causes parties to change and governments to change. You'll talk about that too. As for advocating that the government uses what revenue it collects to provide services to benefit citizens, it is ironic that the same agents of the developed countries who expound the virtues of the privatizing of public services because governments are inefficient use the other side of their mouth when convenient. And that's something that I point out. I am willing to say it all along. I can see that the government is inefficient. So we don't really want the government in business. But because the government is inefficient, I rather you directly give the money to the citizens as much as possible. Here's an idea, and it's a conversation that has been going on in other countries. If we could calculate how much the government, the state, pays per child in education per year, And instead of the state using that money to run the education system, we give parents vouchers to use in private education institutions of the same amount of money. Do you think the average student would do better or worse? If you give the average parent the money to send the child where they think the child would do best, Chef Lawrence says he thinks they will do worse. The average child would do worse. If the parent decides where and when to send the child. Chef Lawrence, are you a teacher in the education industry at all? By the way? Abu says can't have that because we need to create worker butts, of course, and that was the purpose of public education in and of itself. But Abu, there are people who are convinced that public education is the only way to educate people. And if you leave it up to private people, it's going to be worse, and people are going to fall through. And up till now, every single homeschool child exceeds the public education children. And we're looking out in Moruga and seeing girls beating each other with tables and chairs. How much you want to bet if that was a private institution where the parents seeing a video like that will pull every child out, and every single teacher, guard, and supervisor in that school will not receive a cent? If that was the case, that would have never happened. If it was private institutions that could refuse service, and when your little devil of a child get expelled out of 10 previous schools, no school accept them, you have to find some work for that child now all on your own. Do you think that would have been worse? Really? But is our electricity subsidized? Really? Guess who really gets an electricity subsidy on natural gas prices? According to the Ministry of Energy's most recent bulletin, TNT's daily natural gas production for January to September 2024 averaged 2,492 million standard cubic feet per day. Of that, 270 MSCF, or 10.8%, was used for power generation. So 270 of a million standard cubic feet per day is used for power generation, 10.8% of our total. Meanwhile, 104 million standard cubic feet per day is unaccounted for in the bulletin. We don't know where it goes, basic. Well, now we don't say we don't know where it goes. It's not accounted for in the official bulletin. This typically falls into one or more of 5 categories, which are likely reported to the ministry but does not appear in the bulletin. 1. Gas that is compressed and returned into the underground reservoirs for retaining pressure. 2. Flaring or burning on the production site, usually as safety measures. 3. Venting unburned natural gas methane into the atmosphere, again as a safety precaution. 4. Uncontrolled leakage from pipelines or facilities. And 5. In-field use, typically for power generation in or near the producing oil or gas fields. Of these, there is very little of the first 4 in TNT at the moment, meaning that most of this gas is used by the oil and gas producing companies for power generation in their operations. Under law, the Minister of Energy and Finance have the responsibility to determine the price these companies pay for this gas, but they have traditionally and still give it to them for free. Decades after natural gas became a commercial commodity. Further, they can determine the level of royalty, but again, continue to give it away free of royalty. So the oil and gas companies use around 100 million cubic feet per day of TNT's gas for free. $100 million standard cubic feet per day of TNT's gas to these companies for free, according to this energy expert. This is in the Daily Express. Meanwhile, domestic users consume about a third of the electricity generated in TNT, which works out to 81 to 90 million standard cubic feet per day. Less than the oil companies. Yet they have been pushing hard for an increase in the price we pay for our own gas, while they use more than we do for free. Yeah. Yeah, you know, I like this writer's signature, at least this piece in his signature. Anthony Paul is neither a lawyer nor an economist. He has worked in various roles in the oil and gas industry, studied English comprehension at Woodbrook Presbyterian School. I feel I'm gonna include something like that in my in my bio everywhere. Did well at comprehension in primary school. And that's a lot of what is needed oftentimes. That's a lot of what is needed. But yeah, that's the influence game. And you see, the problem is, oftentimes, we watch that and we'd be angry, for example, with just the multinational companies. But almost surely, that's not just on the multinational companies. Somebody is making a lot of money to allow this to happen. Somebody is making bank from this. And I mean somebody locally. Abu is speaking about influence. And you know, that's an interesting topic to bring up. Especially with regard to this. And the recent bacchanal with Donald Trump and Elon Musk cutting USAID. That was one of the key influence operations by the US all over the world. US dollars flooding into your society. So while you have a government running a budget, you have the US and their underhanded cronies. Bear in mind, these people may not all be working for the benefit of every single US citizen. They may be working for their own selfish benefit, but nonetheless, they're in there with as it were, a black budget running parallel to your country's budget. And the aim and intent of their budget could be opposite than the aim and intent of your country's budget. Imagine if you have a country, you're spending 50 billion per year in TT dollars, which works out to what? A couple billion US. And this group could enter your country with as much as your same budget for your entire country and use that to influence operations throughout your whole country. And they have done it numerous times. There are many coups Or, there was somebody talking about a list of all the coups that were financed by USAID. And someone was saying it might be a shorter list to find the coups that were not influenced and financed by them. And speaking of the influence and financing of USAID, let's look at an article that popped up just today, in my view, that directly impacts that. Human rights body expands role to oppose colonial laws. Founded in 2006, the Caribbean Center for Human Rights initially focused on the death penalty and criminal justice reform. But over the years, the focus expanded to other aspects of human rights. And with that expansion, a new space was necessary. As a result, the CCHR opened its headquarters in January, an office at Plaza de Montrose. CCHR Director Dr. Timothy Afonso said, "Our aim to bring an awareness to human rights, but beyond education and public awareness, it's also to actively participate in making things better." All nice and wonderful. But how does an association that is interested in just human rights and makes no money, how do they rent a headquarters and pay for staff and a director and all of that? How? Therefore, Mary Jo Marsden, executive director of CCHR, explained the organization became the representative for UNHCR project, providing legal assistance to asylum seekers and refugees in 2024, and so opened its office in Chaguanas. Now it is expanding its service to provide strategic litigation to assist people exposed to human rights infringements and to address the saving law clauses in many Caribbean constitutions. Strategic litigation is the practice of pursuing legal cases to achieve broader societal change by influencing policy, setting legal precedents, or raising public awareness about a particular issue. What business does UNHCR have in influencing how our society changes? And in case you didn't know, one of the chief sponsors, if not the chief sponsor of UNHCR, is USAID. So who knows? Maybe this Caribbean Center for Human Rights here, maybe they're publicizing, because why would they write this article right now? Maybe they're coming public because they have to look for some more donors, because that USAID money might dry up. Trumpy and his boy Elon decided they're not on that. And to be honest, I am happy. I do not want US dollars that they are printing and impoverishing us with to then come back around and be used to pay for lawyers for illegal Venezuelans to turn around and sue us. I wonder. Remember we had Venezuelans last year winning millions of dollars from us? Illegal Venezuelans that came into our country illegally, were sent out, returned illegally, turn around and sue us, win the case, and winning money from us. You all remember those cases? I wonder if this was how they got those cases done. Did I sprint US in such a way to impoverish us? Could have fooled me. I say this nearly every other live week. How do we get US dollars? We need, first off, you thought it's only the SSS be the devil. How do we get US dollars? And we need US dollars to trade internationally. It's the international trade currency. How do we get US dollars? Well, We must pay for it. We must produce something of worth that we can trade for and get US dollars. Okay. And where do US dollars come from? Their printer. So if they're printing it and we have to trade for it, Tony Haricharan say, Rowley, bring them here. Okay, Tony. Okay. Like, you aren't following what I'm saying here. You aren't following what I'm saying. Maybe this might be the right life for you. This isn't about Rowley, bring them here. This is a human rights organization that has been facilitating this. And it's being done all across the world. Did Dr. Rowley send the Venezuelans to the United States? The Venezuelans that Trump is so insistent on getting rid of now. Did Dr. Rowley send them there? No. There are agencies that facilitate this. We literally just went through an organization that has a headquarters out in Montrose. Montrose isn't a PNM stronghold. We could have said no. No, we could not. Because we signed on to the UN treaties. So technically, we can't say no. And here's another part of it. When we try to say no and post them back, they sue us. And you know who lines up as the lawyers for them to sue us? UNC lawyers. UNC lawyers are lined up to represent these Venezuelans, where they get the money from, interesting, lined up to represent them, to sue us so that they could stay here. And then you jump in to say, this is Rowley. No. The politics has your brain addled a bit. It's no one side. You see the idea that it's a bad guy versus a good guy and my side is the good guy. That's how you get fooled now, self. Billions of US dollars are funneled into this. Remember, there's an activist lady in Trinidad that occasionally would throw some random protest with 50 people over some Venezuelan issue. Who funds her? Marsden gave the example of refugees or asylum seekers who came to Trinidad and Tobago illegally and faced deportation. After years of being in the country and creating a life here with his spouse and children, should that person be considered for deportation? She said, we are saying although the law exists, there might be considerations we might ask be given. But we don't have a law saying after somebody has been here 3 years, they could then in fact apply for legal status. So they're out here attempting to get these people in our country. And don't get me wrong, I am not against people, Venezuelan immigrants, properly immigrating and getting help. But there's a limit to this. And if we're talking about asylum seekers and how much of 1 million Venezuelans are legally asylum seekers, we can't be expected to honor that. Yet we have these organizations here. And bear in mind, when you see the people at the top of these organizations, they are ideological zealots. They're like religious people. They religiously believe in their weirdo humanist doctrines. They hold on to the rainbow and all the other progressive ideals as if it's part of their church doctrine. Afonso says CCHR did not want to only host conferences where the same people showed up all the time. That is why it identified cases that were deemed important and the organization paid for lawyers to represent the clients. So you will be blocked. We don't do trolling here. If you want to talk about a topic, start your own live or shut up. That's why Biden administration was pissed when the government didn't recognize Guaido. They say it here. Foreign money is coming in to pay for their legal representation. It has also been partnering with UE Legal Aid Clinic for representation. CCHR was also doing work on constitutional reform. Afonso explained the organization got a grant from the Open Society Foundation to engage in research into all constitutions across the Caribbean, looking into the Saving Law Clause, which essentially protects all pre-independence or colonial laws from constitutional challenge. Anybody? 10 points for anyone who knows who the Open Society Foundation represents. Who is their money? Where do they get money from? Whose money is the Open Society Foundation? Anybody knows? Does anybody have any idea? Very famous name if you're into online conspiracies. One Mr. Georgie Porgy Pudding and Sarosi Pie. Anybody knows or heard that name? Literally, George Soros is sponsoring constitutional reform in Trinidad and Tobago. What? He said those laws were dangerous as they often targeted people who were not a part of mainstream society, like the LGBTQIA community. Why must we allow foreign money to attempt to influence social policy in our country? Like, think about this for a second. We were just talking about oil and gas. If, and we know it happens, but they have to hide and do this. If we see BP funding an organization attempting to change legal policy in Trinidad and Tobago to how they would benefit from it, we would all say this is neo-colonialism. The colonialists are trying to take us over again. But because a lot of people are hopped up on internet culture and pop culture, they think, oh no, I want to be a progressive, so this is a good thing. This is a good thing. I don't want it. Listen, if Nathan and viewers don't want to say the rainbow people, listen, if Trinidad and Tobago on its own decides that we want to have a certain level of acceptance, we want to legalize something, we are okay with this level. We don't want the LGBTQIA2+, we maybe only want LG and B, and we'll stop right there. That's Trinidad's decision to make. What business is it of a billionaire American and the American underworld government, USAID weirdness, to decide this? What is it their business? And in that case, why wouldn't you be exceedingly happy that the US president is looking to cut this folly out? I would be glad when that office closes for lack of funding. If you want to be funded, get local people to fund you, and local people want it. I am nearly certain all of those parades, if you could find the funding, would be USAID. If they cut USAID, don't be surprised we have no parades this year. Because where do these 20 people get the money and the legal representation to go and throw a parade? Where does it come from? 20 people and a lot of very odd stragglers. And it's literally being forced down our throats, because they wouldn't have to pay people to do it if the country... They wouldn't have to pay for it to be done. Afonso says the CCHR was in the process of publishing a book for the benefit of regional governments and students to point out the harm of the saving law clause and explain why it should be removed. Miles then added, some of those are very minor and some are very significant. One of them is the death penalty, which is probably the most significant, and in many Caribbean countries we're now fighting to have the death penalty abolished, because as you can see from a human rights perspective, the death penalty is not acceptable against modern justice standards. Says who? Says who? And here's the irony of this, me personally as an individual, I am against the death penalty because I don't think it's in a state's job to do. Many states in the United States currently have the death penalty as their law. And if Trinidadians see it as being justice, who are you as a foreign paid entity to determine, no, this isn't justice? Tell me, how is this anything but imperialism? This isn't just the empire trying to enact their view of morality and justice on all of their small colonial states. There's now a phenomenon of climate migrants, people who leave their homes because of climate change events like increasing temperatures or erosion or coastal territories or rising sea levels. It's happening in the region. No thanks. I don't want it. I don't want it. I don't want it. We are capable of deciphering human rights in Trinidad and Tobago all on our own without the outside influence. And who gave you the supremacy to decide how our morality is supposed to shape up? Who made you the determinant of such? And you know, this is the problem to me with religion leaving the public. Atheism growing, lack of religion growing. Morality now has to find a different center. You see, previously what it was is we looked to the state for political solutions regarding the general living of the people. And for moral and spiritual decisions and conversations, we looked to religion. But when religion is pushed out, the state takes the place of the religious. So the state now has to decide on moral and spiritual values. And here's the irony in that. Do you know who is the chief sponsor of atheism and NGOs that promote atheism across the world? USAID. Interesting, innit? Sponsor atheism, remove the religious moorings, and then come in and replace it with your own morality, which is of course superior, says you. No thanks. I'm glad you closed. And I hope he fully shuts it down. Close it. No more. Nothing. Cut the funding to UN too? Better yet. Better yet. And the thing is, so many people buy the scare tactics of these things without actually having any proof. The UN would tell every sponsor across the world that they're doing extremely important work in Trinidad, and if they stop, poor people would suffer. You think so? The UN has been a sponsor of criminal justice reform in Trinidad. Has our criminal justice been reforming? Have we been seeing benefits out of the war on crime? Or is it just very convenient to say we helping poor people and that way nobody could ever stop your money flow? Just in case you needed more evidence, Clinton and Bush Foundation, Haiti, do you know where the dollars that they reappropriated passed through? Listen, that organization, I saw someone say it and I kind of agree. That organization might be properly defined as a terror organization, a global terror network. A global terror network, properly defined as that. Insane. And I don't want it. And I'm glad if they're gone. That's all I have for now, people. Any further comments or questions before I dive out? Or is that all for tonight? All right. Well, if that's all for tonight, people, I hope you're educated, informed, or entertained. This has been the Mindful Life. I'm Nathan Springer. I'll see you guys again for the next Mindful Life tomorrow night, around, after 9. After 9. The time here exact these days. But until then, people, hold it down. Stay well, stay good, stay inside, outside, sketchy. Go and marry somebody, child, and make some nice babies out there now. We need people in the population. Do the thing right. Alright, people, laters, hold it down. Stay good. I'm out. Bye.